Welcome to the Donna Sebo Show Special Editions. This program is dedicated to featuring authors and experts from around the world who will share their knowledge and insight with you. The viewing and listening audience. Literacy and education are the keys to freedom, and diversity enables one to live in a world with broader perspectives. This is Donna Sebo, and I will be your host for the next hour. This video provides general information and discussions about health and related subjects. The information and other content provided in this video or in any linked materials are not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. Welcome to the Donna Sebo television show Special Editions. Love, well, it has its own magic, and that is going to be the topic of our program today. And I'm so glad you're joining me. You know, when I have the opportunity through my daily radio programming to interview people from different parts of the world that have all kinds of expertise and background, it's a delight for me to be able to share their presence with you. Why? Because so often we have a disassociation in today's world. People don't realize that a lot of what we see happening in technology, in advancements in different areas, it's people that come up with the concepts, people that make a difference. And it is how we treat people, how we interact with people, our communication with people. It's also very, very important. My guest is Dr. Stephen Post. This is a gentleman who holds a very interesting positioning. He is the director for the Medical Humanities and Compassionate Care, Stony Brook University Renaissance School of Medicine. Now, think about that. How many people use the term Renaissance? What does that term mean to you? To me, it represents the very thing it represented in past human history, and that is stepping into the environment of being able to deal with new attitudes, new aspects, understanding, and growing into a bigger and better part of ourselves. Dr. Post, I want to welcome you to the program.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you and honored as well.
Well, thank you so much. Now, you are in Ohio, is that correct?
Well, I'm not. I'm in New York.
Oh, you're in
right
New
now
York. Okay,
because
all right.
Stony Brook is in New York, but my Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love is an Ohio-based 501c3, and I spend time in Ohio managing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's quite a job. Now, you have come out with your book, and we already have done, an interview on my radio show about it, but it is Pure Unlimited Love. Now, for
Yes.
most people, when they hear the word love, they're probably going to immediately think of romantic love first. But I always say that love is like a rainbow. Love has so many different dimensions to it, so many different aspects to it. And you bring this out in your book. You've written before. Why did you choose this topic? It's not a medical something. Why?
Well, I've written on a great many medical subjects, and this does have medical implications for sure in terms of the application of the manifestations of love in healing arts and in clinical settings. But love ultimately makes the world go round, and I think that we've forgotten to some degree how to love one another, love your neighbor as yourself, despite the fact that they may have differing opinions. There's too much polarization in our culture. Too many people are flying off the handle, are harming those who disagree with them, turning to violence, and we don't need any of that. It's not healthy. It's not the America that I grew up in with my parents who would argue at the dinner table, but nobody threatened divorce. So I think this is a book for the times that we live in, to remind us that ultimately love is the most important energy in our lives.
You know, it's interesting that you make that comment because on my way into the studio, it's very interesting. Perfect stranger walking her dog. I say good morning to her, and she's very kind, and her dog reacted to me. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You know, I didn't realize that your dog would react that way." She said, "Oh, it has nothing to do with you." I said, "What, you know, I don't quite understand." She said, "It is your black coat." There was an accident that she was in. Her dog was injured in that accident, but it was a black car that hit them. And the man that came out of the car was furious with her, absolutely furious. And he was wearing black. So whenever the dog sees black, and it's a young dog, it's terrified, it's frightened. And so, you know, you look at that and you go, how many times do we have these reactive moments? Just what you've mentioned, the road rage, people getting out of a car, stabbing someone. Why? You know, why? What is the reason behind it? It doesn't make sense. Not at all.
Well, it's completely contrary to the form of love that we're discussing today, and we're not talking about the love of chocolate or the love of even designer jeans, although I like jeans. We're talking about something much more profound, and our culture either reinvigorates that profundity, or we will in fact perish. And we're sort of in the direction of perishing right now. I'm very optimistic ultimately because in these difficult times, there are always great spots of light, and that makes the future promising. But love, what is love? Uh, your audience may have different views, but a definition I like to use from my Chicago days, uh, when the well being and security of another is as meaningful or real to you as your own, and sometimes even more so, then you love that person. Now, there's no fancy language there, no Greek, no Latin. It's just pretty straightforward, commonsensical English that you would use if you were sitting in a coffee shop with an old friend. Um, and then the question of what are the manifestations of love is really important because you can have a difficult time using the language of love in the workplace, even in the family, in the school, and so forth. But if you think about it, the typical expressions of love are perfectly understood, expected, and you can have love underlying all those things like forgiveness, kindness, what I call carefrontation,
Mm-hmm.
uh, loyalty, helping activities, creativity. You can have love underneath all of those everyday manifestations that people are comfortable with. So I don't need to talk about love in the workplace. This is a big medical school I'm in, and my office is right in the middle of it. Um, but uh, but it's the manifestations of love, including things like mirth. I like to think that we can laugh again. I think we've lost the ability to laugh, unfortunately, as a culture. And yet, if you go back to Norman Cousins, who was the editor of the New York Review of Books for many years, he was in a hospital in New York with a major autoimmune disease, and no one could help him. And he decided that he wanted to laugh himself better. So he listened to uh, cartoons. Uh, I won't go into the details, but he got better, and people were surprised. And that's where the field of psycho neuroimmunology began. And you're out on the West Coast, so at UCLA, they have the Norman Cousins Center. And what do they study there? They study laughter and its contribution to recovery and health. And it's absolutely incredible because laughter, as long as it's not derisive or hurtful to anyone, in a millisecond, if it's done well, it can completely reverse these attitudes of uh, hatred, animosity, and can allow people to enter into a kind of new attitude, which will relieve them of stress and allow them to heal. And there's a lot to that science, but there are books and books and books written about mirth, humor, laughter, and healing. And you notice that um, the the idea of laughter is built into Buddhism, the laughing Buddha. It's built into Christianity. Uh, and so we need to recultivate that and not become so polarized and so morose and so divided that we forget that we're allowed to laugh. And that in a millisecond, the right kind of mirth and humor will transform our health.
Oh, absolutely. That is so very, very true. You know, you have a couple of statements in your book that I found quite interesting. One was the oceanic state and quietism. Let's
Mhm.
go into that because those are terms, I don't think that they're going to be in anybody's everyday conversation.
Well, the quietists were basically mindful people in New England. They actually got started in Italy and France in the 1700s, and they were very influential on culture in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And essentially, it's a form of meditation, not unlike Buddhism and Hinduism, where you don't want to get your mind overly active. You want to actually slow your mind down, even to the point where it's empty. You're not captured by what the Buddhists call the monkey language going on in your mind. You're free of it, and you can be then filled with this higher energy, this higher presence, this higher mind. Most of these traditions have two words for mind. On the one hand, there's the mind, the human mind, with all of its preoccupations, all of its anxieties, rushing from point A to point B, and that kind of linear rationality, which is so much a part of our everyday lives. But then there's the mind that just lets go of all that and recognizes its unity with a higher mind, with a universal mind. And that's now very much well demonstrated by neurologists and by philosophers of mind. Sometimes it's called the one mind. I call it the one mind in my book. But it's a very important element in our lives, and it can help us to heal remarkably well if we're meditational, mindful, and not caught up in anxiety and negative emotions.
That I think for most people is not going to be it's not going to be an easy thing because we've been so indoctrinated that we're supposed to be that way. We are supposed to walk, talk, be in that high energy aspect that just, yeah, we're really doing it. Americans have been perceived for I don't know how long as workaholics. We've been perceived as people that don't want to take vacations. We are always buzzing like little honeybees, and we're just going mile a minute. Anybody that's ever been in Manhattan in New York, you know exactly what that's like, because if you can't keep up with the people that you're walking with, you're going to be in trouble. There's a dynamic with the
Yes.
American self, and it's a dynamic that I enjoy. But that other side of being able to be quiet, to be able to have that motion, somehow or another, we're going to get through this. It really is a discipline to learn that, isn't it?
It is. You have to work at it. It's really the essence of spirituality. You know, we did a little study of widows and widowers, and it turns out that most of them all go through, if they had any kind of a happy marriage, a period of grief and bereavement. they get through that period more quickly and in a more lasting fashion if they can self-report helping activities, generous behavior, small acts of volunteerism, uh, just doing things to help others in the neighborhood. And maybe they'll come into the hospitals and volunteer for some particular purpose or not. But the ones who could self-report that they were helping others felt better more quickly. And I think in part it was because they were getting their minds off the self and the problems of the self. And by focusing on the well being of another, they themselves unlock a certain kind of inner biology, and that's been very well defined, which is healthy for them, which cuts down stress. So this paper came out, and I got a phone call from the New York Society of Widows and Widowers. There is such a thing. And they were having an annual meeting in Manhattan. So they wanted to invite me to speak. And I said, I could do that. I came into this big hotel and there was a big ballroom, lots of people there. And I gave a talk about how we need to get away from transactional thinking, although that's a part of life, but it doesn't have to dominate every little square inch of your life. You want to keep it on the shelf as appropriate, and then just think about without any expectations of reciprocation. When you, I call it give and glow, when you give to others with kindness, you oftentimes feel what they call a helper's high. You feel happier, you feel more purposeful in life. There are many, many benefits. So I talked about these things. And then we had some time for questions and answers. There was a fellow in the back of the room, and he was frantically waving his hands. And I called on him, and he said, I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing. And, that's a very destructive, self-destructive attitude
Yes.
because many people are victims of it.
Mm-hmm.
They're just calculating every moment of their lives. And if they would let that go, just put it on the back burner and be freer in their generosity and their love for their neighbor, they would feel great relief. And that's been very well documented. In fact, in the book, in that chapter, I talk about a national survey done with a big health insurance company. And it turns out that people who volunteered in 2009, on average, we did a national survey, it was about 100 hours a year, or break it down, it might be a couple of hours a week. But people who volunteered reported much greater physical health. 80% of them said they were not as bothered by disappointments and losses. They were happier and so forth, which is all pretty amazing. But it's hard for people to see that if they've been, shall I say, hoodwinked into thinking that you're just a fool, a kind of a sucker, if I can use the word, if you think in those terms without any kind of official payback.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think of someone, I was smiling when you said, I don't do nothing, but I've been, getting something. I mean, that is generally what was being conveyed. And I have to tell you, I knew someone, in fact, I know of about 3 people that are hardcore negative. When you ask them, how's your day? I got an ache here, I got something in my head, and they go into all of this description. What I have found with most of those people is, one, some of them are very frightened and they're very, very much alone. Number 2, somehow or another they were taught that.
Yes.
That is what they were taught to do. And they were taught maybe by their environment they grew up in. It could have been a particular adult, when it comes male or female, I don't care. It's just that part that automatically comes out. And they often deeply regret it, and they feel so badly inside. They just feel terrible inside. And so you
Yes.
have this, and later on, I know some people that can be so caustic, they'll hang up on you in the middle of a conversation or because you're not doing what they want you to do, or they'll turn their back on you, or they'll just call you stupid. They'll do something like that. And it's taken me a long time to really stand back for just a moment and say to myself, I wonder, and this is a kahuna saying, what's eating at you? Makes me want to ask them, what is eating at you? And I would say they start to cry. You know, or if you do that, they go, oh, I'm sorry, or I've had this, or maybe they're in constant pain. And I think of a nurse. She had a crusty old seaman as a patient. This man had expletives coming out of his mouth. Everybody hated to deal with him, just absolutely hated to deal with him. This gal came on duty. He talked to her a certain way. Do you know what she did? She talked right back at him. She used the same kind of jargon. She had been raised around sailors, and she was one of the most gracious women you'd ever want to know. She just let him have it. And he burst into a smile. He said, my dear, you're the center of my heart. And it just, here you have a scenario that anybody else would just be mortified in. Not her. She was someone that knew who he was because she had had an experience of life about the language that was being used and why it was being used. Nobody else dealt with him but her. She had sole supremacy over him. But your book about love, kindness, civility, we are seeing this not just in the United States. We are seeing this it's like a cancer, a virus that's going around the world. And we as individuals need to put an end to it, don't we?
Yeah, and we can. We just have to make a determination. It raises the question, so what does it mean to be fully human? And all of the studies which I cite in the book from Yale and elsewhere on toddlers, children who were between 1 year and 18 months, points out that they have a strong sense of empathy. I won't go into the research, but it's very compelling and it's been replicated in Europe and elsewhere. So these young kids are not just swashbuckling gremlins like you're sometimes uh, taught to believe. They actually have tremendous natural capacities. And Darwin believed that, Charles Darwin, who in the end of his life really wasn't into the survival of the fittest, because that typically means me versus you for some desirable object that we are competing for. Rather, a lot of evolution occurs between groups, and groups do better when they evolve internally characteristics of kindness, helpfulness, altruism, and love. So there's a biological basis to this that's very well established and is not controversial. And yet, an awful lot of people feel somehow that if they let themselves go in that direction of kindness, that somehow they are missing out on things. They're not missing out on anything. They're opening doors of opportunity, of higher purpose, of a more meaningful life. So that's what we need to encourage. And this idea that somehow because somebody disagrees with me politically, that they're not a human being, that they're not worthy of my concern, that's crazy. Now, it is true that parents will sometimes push the wrong buttons, and that's what the literature now indicates, that parents sometimes just scream bloody murder at their very young children. There's a book out called Scream Free Parenting. About 99% of parents have to acknowledge that there are times when they were felt very badly because they totally lost it with their young children. And if you have an environment, a relationship or two of primacy where you don't, in fact, have the nurturing of that kindness, then you are set back And those are the people who typically wind up with mental health issues later in
Mm-hmm.
life or physical illnesses. And there have been lots of studies of that. So you want to think about how to raise kind children. There's a chapter in the book about how to do that. And we actually supported um, major researchers to the tune of several $1 million to come up with those guidelines in that chapter. How can you actually intentionally raise a kind child? It's one thing to bring a child into the world. Okay, that takes some doing, obviously, more so for ladies than for guys. But how do you really manage to orchestrate the relationship of kindness that you need to see that nurtured in your children because they have the natural capacity for it. They have a natural empathy. How do we do that? And that's the sort of question that needs to be front and center uh, in education, and we need to really turn the world around. When people want to have kids, why do you want to have kids? Well, okay, it's not just for career and financial success, but you want them to be kind.
It really is something, I think lots of times we need to have some kind of an educational program. I know that sounds very formal, but when you have in your educational system those adults, it's up to us adults, when we really look at what we're experiencing now, instead of the blame game, we need to acknowledge how this has evolved. We need to look at
Yes.
it. We need to understand the cultures that we have contributed to, the cultures that we have enforced, the cultures that have supported what we didn't want to see as a result. I mean, it's all about people. It's all
It's
about
all
people.
about people. It's all about people. And you can't start too young. So one of the things that my institute funded, thanks to Sir John Templeton, the philanthropist and investor in the Templeton funds, which became very successful 40 and 50 years ago. But Sir John really believed that you don't want to wait until later in life. Work with kids. So we funded a very wonderful competitive project in the inner city grade schools on the East Coast, the middle Atlantic states. And what we found is that if you taught children quietism to slow their mind, to uh, to be mindful and meditational, even in the first and second grades, and they are capable of this,
Mm-hmm.
that they settle down, they're less agitated, they're less angry and hostile, they do not act out these negative behaviors, and they're doing better in school. Now that's a message for any educator. They're doing better in school because they have something to learn about that is meaningful. They want to learn how to help their neighbor. They begin to think about how they can use their talents and their gifts to the benefit of others. And these schools, they don't have a principal's office where if you make a mistake, you go and get screamed at, but rather they have mindfulness offices. You can go to the mindfulness office and they'll help you have some insight into your emotional state, help you get control over it, teach you some breathing techniques. And these things work very effectively. So the kids then get so thrilled by this that they bring these techniques back to their families. For example, in inner city Baltimore, it's a big case in point. And the families love to learn about this. They love to learn about how they can get these very negative, uh, nasty thoughts, what the Buddhists call the monkey mind, how they can get that out of themselves through the right kind of methods. And that opens them up for love. Because you have to, as they say, you know, uh, perfect love casts out fear. It
Mm-hmm.
casts out a lot of things too,
Mm-hmm.
including rumination, hostility, uh, bitterness, revengefulness. And in fact, what we know from the science is that when those positive emotions get turned on, they involve a part of the brain called the mesolimbic pathway. And when that's turned on, the negative, uh, aggressive, hurtful parts of the brain are turned off. They can't be turned on simultaneously. So it's either one or the other. And if you can cultivate the other and keep the one under control, the positives outweigh the negatives. So the do's overwhelm the don'ts.
I feel that that is, again, part of a cultural aspect that is so necessary to be able to recognize and to realize it doesn't show weakness, not in the
No,
least. See, I think we've got a lot of misconceptions that have gone on in so many respects. We have these attitudes if you do not have, I'll use a silly description, a stiff upper lipper, don't show any emotion, don't allow yourself to be vulnerable, because if you do that, then that means you are weak. Now, how
yes,
often has that been dumped on, especially with men and
yes,
even with women? And that goes back historically. I mean, generations. We're talking even
yes,
thousands of years in different cultures. You just don't show anything. You don't allow yourself to be vulnerable. One of the aspects in your book is follow your calling. Now,
yes.
that's not easy to do because, again,
No,
we like to pigeonhole people. We want to pigeonhole each other. And my goodness, I've yet to meet a human being that doesn't have multiple talents. I mean,
absolutely.
this is so important. You designated this chapter in your book on love, and I thought, now that's an interesting title. Follow your calling. Why did you
Yes.
have that in your book?
Well, I spent 20 years in Cleveland, Ohio. I guess you could call me an Ohioan in many respects. Um, and I used to drive out to the farm where Thomas Alva Edison was born and raised. And Edison had a lot of problems in school when he was 11 or 12 years old. They just threw him out. They sent him home to the farm with a note to his mother that said, "Don't let Thomas come to school anymore. His mind doesn't work right." And his mother said, "Thomas, don't pay any attention to that. We have a big barn over there, and you can tinker with things. You're good at tinkering." And maybe she said, "Maybe Thomas, you can become a light to the world." And he obviously became that and more.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that you can never, if you're a teacher and you tell somebody that they have no gifts, no talents, they have no natural callings. We all have callings, I agree completely.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have done great harm and you should get out of teaching, in my opinion. It's time to do something else. Uh, I never say no to a student. They come in here with, these are very sophisticated medical students with all kinds of interesting, sometimes slightly unworkable ideas, but I never say no without a yes. It's always, well, that's a great idea. Maybe we could move it a little bit over in this direction. And then everybody's happy and it's successful because when you tell any young person that they don't have callings, you have done great damage. You have you had stripped them of their dignity. I am actually on record uh, for sometimes going out into the streets of New York and talking with some of these kids who are just looking like troublemakers through and through. And I'll approach them and I'll say, "Do you know that you are a wonder of creation? Do you know
Mm-hmm.
that you are a miracle of the universe
Mm-hmm.
and you have infinite talents, unique talents? And your purpose in life, which is, by the way, quoting Shakespeare and Picasso and a zillion other thoughtful people, your purpose of life is to develop your talents and serve others. And you'll be so happy. In fact, the Give and Glow chapter, the first chapter, is about all the internal benefits of giving But if you want to sustain that over the course of a lifetime, don't just get into a work situation where you're fitting in and you have a lot of resentment, but get into a work situation where you blur the line between work and play. That's the ideal way to live your life. And so you're always feeling joyful and called into your activities. So I've taught in medical schools for well over 40 years, University of Chicago, Ann Arbor, Case Western, Stony Brook, and I've never gotten to a point where I just had to think, oh, thank God it's Friday. Now, once or twice after a hard week, I've said that to myself, but I don't get into that mentality because I know that I'm using my gifts as as God gave me those gifts, and I use them for the benefit of many hundreds and even thousands of medical students who have gone on to do beautiful things. So having a calling, it doesn't necessarily mean that you hear a voice from above, although it can mean that for a lot of people. But it means that you just feel that what you're doing is attuned to what you are supposed to be doing. And it's very intuitive, but it's really important in life.
Oh, I agree with that. Now, you have two people that you mentioned relative to that chapter. That's Moshe Chagall, and I think that both of those individuals are very significant.
Oh yeah, I love so my mother was an artist, an abstract expressionist, and she knew a lot of people back in those days. She lived out in Bridgehampton, and they even let many of these artists live on the potato farm, if you will. And so she knew most of them, and my mother was influential on me in a good way in this sense. So I studied a little bit of Chagall when I was a youngster, and I learned that he had run away from home when he was 17 or 18 years old. He lived in a small Russian town, a Jewish Russian town, and his father had his business, which was to pickle herring. Nothing wrong with pickling fish, of course, but Chagall didn't want to do that. He felt that he had a calling, which was art, even though he hadn't painted anything yet. So he ran away. He flat out ran away and went to St. Petersburg. And in St. Petersburg, he lived on the streets and he sketched. He sketched well enough so that he could make a living off it. And one night, he writes about this. About 20 years after he left St. Petersburg, he was in Moscow. He wrote a little autobiography called My Life. And in that book, he says, one night I was sleeping on a mattress with a working man, a big, huge working man with a great big mustache and beard. And I was looking up into the ceiling, and this wonderful blue color descended upon me, and I felt it was an angel. And it was pure love. It was pure love, he said. That's all it was. It was the purest, most unlimited love you could ever imagine. And then it ascended. The next day, he went out and he painted his first great painting, which is called The Apparition, and it's of a blue angel. And all of his work, if you go to the Art Institute in downtown Chicago, if you go to Israel and look at the Chagall windows in the hospitals, if you go to the UN and look at the Chagall windows there, they're all in some way, shape, or another going to include a blue angel. So my mother took me to the unveiling of Chagall's UN windows when I was a little kid. And I actually got to shake his hand. And he was so clearly feeling called. He was in a perfect flow, they call it now, psychologically. So, he would get beyond any sense of time and place, and he would be so into the flow. He really perfectly blurred that line between work and play. And all of his life, he just knew that blue was the color of love. And when he died, he was in his studio outside of Paris, and he was painting a blue angel. So what's wrong with that? I mean, he was so radiant as a human being. And by the way, he added the second L to Chagall. Originally, it was just Chagal. He added the second L, which in that tradition means with great strides. Once he really firmed up his commitment to his calling, he could walk more strongly. He could do things in more purposeful ways. And so if you can follow, don't be now. You can get pushed away from your calling. You can get tempted by bad ideas, by a little more money over here, or that's not really relevant to what you're called to do. Maybe you get called to a more prestigious institution, but none of that is worth following. You need to follow your callings because if you do that, it's worth everything. It's worth so much joy. You'll be so much better with the people you love. You will find constituencies that you can care for and really tend to over the course of your years. So having a calling is important. And I won't talk about the other person in that little story, but that being myself. It's the one place where I actually use a little autobiographical stuff. But having a calling is important, and I do have a sense of calling, and I guess that's why um, I run a big institute, and Sir John Templeton picked me to be the president of it in the year 2000. I've always been joyful about it. Not everybody in the scientific world gets the idea of pure unlimited love, much less studying it scientifically. But with a little bit of mirth and good heart, you can bring them around. And I brought a lot of people around to this worldwide. I mean, Why Good Things Happen to Good People was a best-selling book on the New York Times list. And this Pure Unlimited Love book is going to do very well because I want people to be free. I want them to be free to follow their callings. It's so vital.
And I think that your message is so strong, but even if we're doing a job that we don't particularly like, because we've got to provide for ourselves
Yep.
and for our family. But when we can keep that inside ourselves, we can just say, I love to carve ducks. I knew a man who was a butcher, unknown to me until I and my husband had the opportunity to go to their home. We were invited there for dinner, and we end up going, and gee, he's got a big job. He worked for a major store, had been employed there for like 25, 30 years. But unknown to me, I was given the opportunity to go into his garage. Now, you might not think that's
Ah,
something very special, but he carved decoys. That was his
yes,
passion. He carved decoys. And I swear, when I looked at them, I expected them to quack. I mean, they were
yes.
just magnificent pieces of art. When he retired, and his work as a butcher provided him with a wonderful income, when he retired, then what occurred is that he took his grandkids with him to all of the different shows. He was winning first place prizes. He couldn't participate in a lot of these programs because he was working full time, but he didn't give up what he loved. And then when he retired, that was his passion. He had a whole new world in his life. He absolutely adored the people that he was coming in contact with, and he was carving duck decoys, and they were masterpieces. I mean, to even consider putting them in water, I said, I don't think anybody's going to do that. They are just too beautiful, and
Yeah.
they're just
Yeah.
gorgeous. You never know where that beauty of what
Yeah.
is calling you inside, where that is going to be placed, and how that is going to be placed. And I think sometimes it takes a while for us to be able to, like the butcher, to be able
Yeah.
to do what he wanted to do. But that had to overflow and affect everything that he was engaged with in daily work, because that was part of the beauty inside of him that he was doing for other people.
Yeah. And I gotta say, decoys are beautiful things done well. So my grandfather, Edwin Main Post, uh, he was a stockbroker and he married a woman named Emily Price, who became Emily Post, the etiquette writer. And he loved to whittle. When he retired, he just spent time in the neighborhood with all the little children, and he taught them how to whittle birds, little ducks. That and they're now in a museum, believe it or not too far from where I am on the South Shore of Long Island. Uh, but that was what he loved to do, and and I think that we do sometimes have to make sacrifices. Um, I've done certain things in my life. I've worked in shipyards. I've enjoyed that actually, but I've worked in dog grooming palaces and everything. We have to make ends meet. But ideally, if you're really lucky, and it takes a little bit of luck, you have to run into the right people. Uh, your day job, quote unquote, can be consistent with your passion.
Mm-hmm.
And we all are passionaries at some level. And that's why we get alienated, we get frustrated. That's why there's such a problem now with people just walking away from work and wanting to rely on, the public dollar or whatever, because they don't think that they can ever do anything in the work world other than fit in. So we train people, we educate people to fit in, not to make too much commotion, just to be sort of part of the system. We ought to be educating people to follow their callings. And that's why some school systems, like the Montessori system, are so powerful because they get kids when they're very young and they encourage them. They really teach kids to follow their callings. They don't give them a lot of things that are official and assigned and feel dry and dutiful, but they let them pursue what they want to pursue. They have to do it with a degree of excellence and significance. But those kids, as studies have shown, tend to do pretty well in life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Freedom. Freedom comes really from within. There's,
It does.
there's no shortcuts. This is something, it has to come from inside. We talk about being free citizens, we talk about freedom in so many different ways. But the true freedom that your book about pure, unlimited love represents is that when we honor that within ourselves, when we honor ourselves, and I can recall someone saying to me when a comment is made, love yourself, they think it's narcissistic, and it is not. In fact, I was using that kind of terminology just last evening when I was giving a talk before a group, and I said, it's not being narcissistic. You have to understand, if you don't respect, appreciate, and love yourself. And a lot of people, it's like their hearing turns off when they hear that statement. What do you mean? That is not right. I need to love everybody else. But if you don't have respect for yourself, if you don't appreciate and love yourself, you're in many ways going to be a very bitter person, a very lonely person. Because how can you be with someone else or be in a company of people and enjoy them or enjoy where you are if you cannot have that inside yourself?
Very much so true. So that's why I don't go into it in depth in the introduction of the book, but I give that definition of love when the well-being and the security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own.
Mm-hmm.
So you've always got to have that as your own factor there. And sometimes more so, you love that person. So for me, uh, a proper love of self is the beginning point. It's the standard for the love of others. And that's why, like in this medical school, we teach students not just to practice the virtues of benevolence, of care, of compassion, which we want for patients. And they do a beautiful job. We've won national awards in that area. But we also teach them how to take care of themselves
Mm-hmm.
and not to get burned out and not to lose their passion, or, in fact, to forget how to stand up for their own well being and their own integrity. They have to have those values of self love if they're going to be good doctors.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. Look at what happened during COVID, and the the media many times will focus on the negative. And when I say that, I am saying it because I've been a part of media for so many years of my life. And it is something we need to look at facts. We need to be able to look at the good, the bad, even the ugly. We need to be able to face it, see it for what it is, and then determine how it is that we as an individual and
Yes.
collectively as a culture, as a people, to be able to come together and say, we can resolve this. This is not something that we have to get stuck in. That's the key, not getting stuck. And that is where we have to be thoughtful, I feel. We have to be able to think, to reason. But that comes with communication. If you can't communicate with someone, how in the world are you going to be able to resolve a situation? I mean, we all have
Yeah.
our own perceptions. How are we going to do that?
Well, communication is everything in life. It's everything in healthcare. It's just everything in life. And without good communication skills, people tend not to get very far. It's all related to love, but also related to personal success. So, the COVID uh, uh, issues hit this particular hospital very heavily because it's outside of New York and it was designated a COVID center by the state of New York. And I still came into work every day. um, I don't think I ever really contracted COVID. Maybe I did, but I didn't know about it. And I made a point of looking after people. I would use very tasteful dad jokes in some cases if I thought people were despondent. Um, I like humor. I like mirth because again, it turns people into a new being. This is why laughter is so important. I didn't have people laughing in an irresponsible sense, but I could see their pessimism, and I wanted to turn that around. So I use mirth and positive humor as a form of love. The expressions of love, as I say, I get up in the morning, I meditate, I pray a little bit, I try to envision all the people I'm going to encounter, and I know a lot of them because I've been here for 17 years. Um, and I ask myself, so what expression of love do they really need? And that's the wheel of love in the book. Sometimes it's compassion if I know they've been suffering. Sometimes it's respect if they've been disrespected. Sometimes it's listening, it's creativity, it's loyalty if they've been abandoned by a loved one. It can be many different forms. Forgiveness. We had a person, not in this institution, but in another, who had a patient who died due to an completely unnecessary overdose of a medication. And that individual wanted to quit medicine. And so I sat down with him and I said, this is in Ohio, I said, um, those who make no mistakes make nothing. That's a quote from Martin Luther King,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is in the book. Those who make no
Mm-hmm.
mistakes make nothing. And especially in medicine, you're going to make mistakes. But in every uh, part of life, you're going to make mistakes. That's how
So
we
true.
learn.
Absolutely
And
true.
so by saying that to this individual, they took a couple of weeks off because they had to process what had happened. But, they're practicing medicine very successfully now in Akron, Ohio, I might say. So people make mistakes, and that's okay.
It is okay. This has been wonderful having you as a guest. And again, I want my viewers to know that you also have an interview with me on my radio show that you can find in the archives. Pure, unlimited love. It's not a Hollywood movie. It is not a sensationalism. It's real. And it is something that we need to understand. You don't have bells and whistles with it. You're just it. And you give that to yourself as well as giving it to others. I'm
Yes.
so delighted we've had this time together. Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
very much for having me, Donna. It's been a delight.
It's been wonderful, Dr. Post, but I also want to share with my listeners that this television program is available here at the station on TCTV and also other channels, and you can go to my website, delphiinternational.com, and you can find all the details there. And this will be up on YouTube as well as on my website, and you will be able to have access to it 24/7. The wonders of technology today are phenomenal. Remember, though, that you really are the master of your fate. You're the captain of your soul. And all of the information regarding Dr. Stephen Post and his book, Pure Unlimited Love, and that is available to you. His website is going to be made available to you, so you can go and check out the information there as well. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure. And hey, look forward to the next program. Look forward to sharing time with you, my viewing and listening audience, because this is also going to be broadcast, the audio portion of this television show, on one of my daily programs as well. So be sure you check out the information regarding the Donna Sebo radio show, as well as this special editions, the Donna Sebo television show. Bye for now.
You have been listening to the Donna Sebo Show Special Editions. The audio version of this program will also be heard on the Donna Sebo Show radio broadcast. We are delighted you were able to join us and invite you to share this programming with your friends and family. Have a rich and fulfilling life.